Check. Hello, check. 1, 2. It's not coming through the house. It's just supposed to be coming through the Zoom at the moment. Check 1, 2. Hello, check. 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Hello, check. But are you getting me? Check 1, 2. Check.
to be in this extraordinary facility, the Gloria Kaufman Community Center, A-Frame Theater. The courtesy of the Wenda Museum is so special, very special indeed. As a board member of the Ruskin Art Club, board members, my wife and I, and aficionados of the great architectural, architecture critic, art critic, social critic, John Ruskin, we have for some years been privileged to celebrate the March 14th birthday of Ada Louise Huxtable, another great voice in architecture, and perhaps the greatest voice in American architecture criticism, first on the New York Times and then the Wall Street Journal. And a very brief anecdotal history of my friendship, our friendship with Ada Louise. She had a summer home in Marblehead, Massachusetts, and my family is from that part of the world. And so when I called my sister Sandy one day, she said, "You must meet this gal that we've met here in Marblehead. She's terrific. She writes books on art." I said, "Oh, what's her name?" And she said, "Well, I don't remember her last name. It's Ada Louise something." I knew who it was. It was Ada Louise Huxtable. There was only one. And we met, we all fell in love. We had a carosse, to quote Kurt Vonnegut. And what happened eventually was that Ada Louise and Beverly and I became dear friends to the point where, as her life was coming to an end, she asked me to be her agent and to represent her archive, which was exceptional. And that exceptional archive was profoundly understood by the architecture curator at the Getty Museum, Wim DeWitt. Others wanted it, but the Getty reached out and got it, along with the archive of her husband, Garth Huxtable, who was an important industrial designer. You all know the X-Acto blade. Well, he designed that, the X-Acto knife, for example. And the 1939 World's Fair, he worked on that as well. At the end of her life, when she passed away, we were able to arrange for her memorial at the Metropolitan Museum of Art Auditorium. And it was attended by, as we say, le tout architecturel New York. I mean, everybody who was anybody in architecture in New York was there. It was she never wanted a celebration of that sort, a memorial, but it was unavoidable. She was too big a figure for all 5 feet of her. And I had the great honor of reading a poem for her at that memorial, which I will now read, and then I will introduce our executive director, the Ruskin Art Club. Dear Mrs. Huxtable, an unpermitted, I better put the right glasses on. Oops, wrong glasses. Sorry. There we go. Dear Mrs. Huxtable, an unpermitted structure obstructs you now, but many markers last. Our buildings, cities, changed. Alto to Zumthor, your Manhattan files, baluster, architrave, zoning war, glass wall, concrete, steel, turned to order. Fulbright honored, Pritzker honored, Guggenheim honored, MacArthur honored. Honorary doctorates filled your closet with gorgeous velvet snoods. But dining with the King of Spain, you loved the pin you wore. 50 cents in a Marblehead yard sale where, happily less known, you loved the garden you now are. Disegno, Garth's goddess, in books and columns, 1,200 perfect words, your patrician voice, your wry mind's resting search, unresting genius on the page remain. Rare tea, Imari, delicate translucencies endure as you shall, teaching in the texts you sowed. Dreaming architecture, dearest Ada Louise, your breath stopped in such brighter air. So And I would love to introduce you to the brilliant and delightful human being who is the executive director of the Ruskin Art Club, Gabriel Meyer, who will tell you about our evening's events. Gabe?
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for reading that poem. I had never heard that before. It's lovely, lovely. Well, unlike Stuart, in order to see, I am taking off my glasses. I am, as Stuart said, the executive director of the Ruskin Art Club, founded in 1888 here in Los Angeles, and thus the city's oldest cultural association. And delighted to be co-sponsoring this year's Ada Louise Huxtable Lecture on architecture with the Vende Museum. And I would like to thank Cara and all the staff here for their cooperation and their assistance with this event. I can't really pass up this opportunity talking about the oldest cultural association to tell the story of when many years ago I got a phone call from the Shakespeare Club in Pasadena. And we were at that time advertising ourselves as the oldest cultural association in Southern California. And so the voice on the other side of the phone said, when were you founded? I said, 1888. I mean the month. What month in 1888? And I said, well, October. What day in October? I said, the 12th, I think. She says, fine, you should stop calling yourself the Southland's oldest cultural association. We were founded October 5th, 1888. So we have settled for Los Angeles ever since. One of the things that interests us in the Ruskin Art Club, we talk about applied Ruskin. Ruskin not only in himself and in his own thought and in the context of the 19th century, but Ruskin as applied to our challenges in the 21st century. He really is a significant and relevant figure for so many of the issues that we're dealing with today. But one of the things along with that we're especially interested in is the ways in which his influence plays out in different cultures. For example, Ruskin is one of those thinkers whose ideas on art, science, social reform, labor relations, ecological responsibility, and other themes crosses borders and finds fertile soil far away from the 19th century and even from the cultural West. I'm thinking here of Ruskin's influence on Japanese intellectuals in the 19th century. This is a chapter that's not very well known. There were many Japanese intellectuals who adopted Ruskin's views on aspects of aesthetics and his approach to nature, an influence that continues today with the young people in the Ruskin Morris Center in Osaka or in India, where Ruskin had a profound influence on Gandhi, and where his signal work on political economy unto this last has shaped Indian attitudes and preoccupations, particularly about agrarian reform to this day. And so tonight we have an opportunity to observe Ruskin's influence at work in 19th and 20th century Brazil, particularly in architecture. Again, what's always so fascinating is the way in which different cultures seize on aspects of Ruskin's protean thought and then incarnate them in their own individual ways and do something original with them. Our young podcast master, Joseph Rodrigues, who hails from a Brazilian family background, brought Claudio Amaral to our attention. And we did a podcast interview with Claudio some months ago, which is available on our website. Joseph would have been with us tonight to introduce Claudio, but a family medical emergency unfortunately intervened. So let me just give a little background. Claudio and I have had a great day today. A great day for Ruskinians is a day at the Huntington Library looking at the original manuscript of the Seven Lamps of Architecture, including the drawings. So you can imagine what an exalted state we are in this evening. So Claudio and I had a wonderful, wonderful few hours at the Huntington Library this morning. Claudio Silveira Amaral studied architecture at the School of Architecture and Urbanism of PUC-Campinas, the Pontifical Catholic University of Campinas. He has a master's degree and a PhD from the University of São Paulo. He did post-PhD studies at the Ruskin in Lancaster University, UK. We have a connection there. The Ruskin, by the way, at Lancaster University, houses the world's largest collection of Ruskin's manuscripts, drawings, and correspondence. It's a really amazing collections of materials. So Claudio was there for, I think, 4 years or so, and a post-PhD in the RUI BARBOSA Foundation in Rio de Janeiro. His thesis was on John Ruskin and the teaching of drawing in Brazil, later published as a book by Editora UNESP in Portuguese and in English by the Edwin Mellen Press. He also wrote a book entitled RUI BARBOSA, a Reader of John Ruskin, the author of many wide-ranging essays and a career's worth of articles on architecture, Ruskin, and Brazil. He is a retired professor at São Paulo State University. And so I'd like to call Claudio Amaral to the podium.
Good evening. I'm going to read so I don't get lost in my thoughts. Thank you, Gabriel. I'd like to thank the Ruskin Art Club of Los Angeles for inviting me to participate on this important annual event of Ada Louise Huxtable Lecture on Architecture. I am honored to be here. I will be presenting an article written by me and Francisco Barros, Mariana Guarnieri, and Fernando Minto, accepted to be published on Limac Architecture magazine of Lima, Peru. It's called Work Done with Pleasure and Free Work, Utopias Against Barbarianism, John Ruskin and Sergio Ferro. This article is about the alienation of work in the production of architecture and proposals for resistance by two authors, John Ruskin and Sergio Ferro. Ruskin 19th century and Ferro in our days. The similarity between the 21st century and the 19th century worlds of work can be seen in long working hours and in the absence of worker rights. Indeed, the proposals for utopias that resist the deterioration and degradation of work and life are therefore able to value and esteem the world of work. In this context, work performed with pleasure and free work can be seen as ideals of necessary policies to stop the barbarism existing in the contemporary world. Both authors match ethics with aesthetics. The construction industry work environment are characterized by pronounced violence. Workers' technical knowledge is exploited, reflecting the capitalist logic of labor subordination. The construction sector's exploitative character is rooted in labor organization, fostering alienation and subordination. This strategic configuration maximizes surplus value with capitals organic composition. Based on these assumptions, this research is grounded in the hypothesis that one of the causes of barbarism which has emerged the world of work is the recent technological changes which have come about in the productive system. The advent of the so-called Industry 4.0 when implementing digital platforms has contributed to the reduction of salaried employment and the expansion of informal and temporary employment. This article aims to problematize these aspects of the world of work seen through architecture, providing elements for the resistance to this barbarism of precarious working condition. In order to do this, it takes as a paradigm of utopia the concepts of work done with pleasure of John Ruskin and free work of Sergio Ferro. Work done with pleasure, John Ruskin. Let us see how Ruskin, English art critic, reached such a concept. Our hypothesis is that all Ruskinian formulations are based on a certain philosophy of nature. According to him, nature operates in order to carry out what he called the law of help. Ruskin's theory can be placed with those of other thinkers who sought to find logical elements in the order of nature as a supreme reason. Intellectuals, in the intellectual contest of the 18th and 19th century, the age of reason, the age of enlightenment, we can mention Pestalozzi, Humboldt, Froebel, Stuart Mill, Charles Darwin, Spencer, Thomas Huxley, and others. All of these sought to explain the function of nature according to a universal logic, although each of them understood it differently. Nature was recognized as a mother of all knowledge, an epistemological root. But for Ruskin, although nature operates according to reason, it can only be felt by a first impression. Driven by this approach, Ruskin associated the subjective plane with the objective. The Ruskinian composition associates everything with everything else, such as reason with feelings. The law of help fuses elements that in principle do not mix, which is why Ruskin was called a spatial thinker. Ruskin insists that these associations are a necessary part of the act of seeing itself, operating below the level of consciousness and hence of language. George Hersey called Ruskin a visual writer, as opposed to a verbal writer who leaves point A to reach point B without further twists or turns. The visual or spatial writer mixes everything in order to propose something new, to try to build a situation of unstable equilibrium that could disintegrate at any moment and recompose itself with other elements to create a new situation. He is interested in juxtaposition rather than sequence, simultaneity rather than consequence, appearance rather than time. He delights in color, aura, texture, distance. He does not see thought as a form of transport from A to B. It is difficult for Hersey to understand Ruskin because he never concentrates on a single subject. All are joined in him. And when he lets himself be carried away in a movement of his holistic discourse, so to speak, his readers initially feels lost. Hersey compared Ruskin to the Impressionist painter who mixes and dilutes colors on a canvas in the represented object, often perceived only when the viewer is far enough away to appreciate the painting as a whole. Kenneth Clark draws attention to the occasion when Ruskin, in the second volume of Modern Painter, tried to focus on a single subject, and this compromised the aesthetic quality of his work. And he says, when he tries too hard to keep his mind in a single track, as in the second volume of Modern Painter, some of its beautiful colors are lost. Still, it must be admitted that after the age of 30, his inability to stick to the point became rather frustrating, where literally every sentence starts a new train of thoughts. He reduces his reader to a kind of hysterical despair. The mixture of sensory perceptions, sight and sound especially, reinforces the impression of an experience whose part cannot be separated or analyzed. It is just this kind of experience that Wordsworth characterizes as sublime. Ruskin, as a visual writer, sees distance, viewpoints, the elimination of foreground, of movement from near to far. Clark thought that Ruskin test referred to poetic language. And he says, here reminds a poet piercing through the surface of things, seeing similar in dissimulating and illuminating the familiar by some flashing analogy. Reading Ruskin is generally strange, as he associated elements which are not normally related. This can be seen in Modern Painter, when he explained the notion of composition, more precisely the law of help. And he says, we have reached the last and most important part of our subject, composition. Composition may be the best defined as the help of everything in a picture by everything else. I wish the reader to deal a little on this word help. It is a grave one. The power which causes the severe portions of a plant to help each other we call life. Much more is this so in an animal. The intensity of life is also intensity of helpfulness, completeness of depending of each part of all the rest. The ceasing of this help is what we call corruption, and the proportion to the perfectness of help is the dreadfulness of loss. A pure or holy state of anything, therefore, is that in which all its parts are helpful or consistent. They may or may not be homogeneous. The highest or organic purities are composed of many elements in an entirely helpful state. The highest and first law of the universe and the other name of life is therefore help. The other name of death is separation. Government and cooperation are in all things and eternally the laws of life. Anarchy and competition eternally and in all things the laws of death. Clark draws attention to the apparent normality with which social and economic policy issues are linked to moral issues nowadays. Today, we have, on the whole, accepted the notion that the social economic problems cannot be separated from moral issues. The law of help became a kind of methodology which he used in all the subjects he dealt with, from painting to architecture, from education to economic policies, from teaching, drawing to various other subjects and themes, always with a vision that associates things which initially seem disassociated, seeking to build new meanings. In his approach to the world of work, he created the concept of work performed with pleasure, by which those who think do, and those who do think, the synthesis of mankind, and the worker as a whole, conceived in body and soul. He exemplified this concept when discussing the history of ornaments. First, servile ornament, in which the execution of power of the inferior workers is entirely subjected to the intellect of the higher. 2. Constitutional ornament, in which the executive inferior power is to a certain point emancipated and independent, having a will of its own, yet confessing its inferiority and rendering obedience to higher powers. 3. Revolutionary ornament, in which no executive inferiority is admitted at all. I must here explain the nature of the division of somewhat greater length. He identifies this classification at various moments of the history of European architecture. Of servile ornament, the principal school are the Greek, the Egyptians, but their servility is of different kind. The workman was, in these cases, a slave. But in the medieval, or especially Christian system of ornament, this slavery is done away with altogether. The revolutionary ornament allows the free expression of the worker, regardless of classifying his work as right or wrong. By the way, Ruskin will defend the doing wrong as opposed to the doing right of the servile and constitutional ornament, which he disqualified as slave labor, always a copy of something existing, assumed as a standard. Spontaneous doing, imbued with subjectivity, imagination, and free fantasy of the worker, does not get it right or wrong. It is rather a simple expression of the producer and therefore worth of respect. Ruskin examined the division of labor in contemporary factories, criticized them for dividing not only the work, but also the man who performed it. He says, we have much studied and much perfected of late the great civilized invention of division of labor. Only we give it a false name. It is not, truly speaking, the labor that is divided, but the men, divided into mere segment of men, broken into small fragments and crumbs of life, so that all the little pieces of intelligence is left in a man is not enough to make a pin or a nail, but exhausts itself, making the point of a pin or the head of a nail. In the first part of this article, we talked about John Ruskin's law of help, how he transforms it into a methodology, into the approach to nature and other subjects of his interests like ethics and aesthetics. From the perspective of the same law, Ruskin proposed a concept of work performed with pleasure. Pleasure intrinsic to work, its original nature, in which the worker both thinks and does as he does and thinks, without hierarchy of command between both dimensions of creation. Now, Sergio Ferro, free work. Sergio Ferro, a Brazilian architect, professor, he's a Marxist, author, and painter, elaborated a history for architecture from the point of view of the class struggle based on concept of work organization that broke with the knowledge and know-how of the construction worker. As a reaction to this process that degraded and debased work, Sergio Ferro responds with the concept of free work, an utopia that aims to restore this knowledge and worker know-how. The construction of classic design, the latest book that he wrote, tells the history of architectural design from the 11th century as the degradation and debasement of work at the architecture construction site. Sergio Ferro says that in the 11th century architectural design was produced internally on the construction site by workers, architects, carpenters, etc. There was no hierarchy of command, and during the production process, everyone gave their opinion on aesthetics and technical solutions. Ferro explains that the design was initially made on the construction site on scale 1:1, with compasses, rulers, and gigantic squares that drew either on the floor or on the walls. A collective reflection of knowledge and popular know-how transmitted by word of mouth in the form of secrets, so that they had greater power to bargain with the employers for better working condition and wages. The loss of popular knowledge began when the production of the design ceased to be a collective production internal to the construction site and started to be produced by the architect outside the construction site and was brought to it as a work order. Sergio Ferro says that this moment coincided with the introduction of the organization of work in the form of manufacturing at the construction site, which came from the textile manufacture in Florence and consisted of an extreme division of labor into differentiated and specialized teams for function with the help of rudimentary tools. The transition from manufacturing to the factory never took place in civil construction. And the reason for this is that, according to the Marxist concepts of living labor and dead labor, the machines, it is living labor that produces surplus value, a greater value, so that there is a reproduction of capital during the production process. Sergio Ferro believes that even in industrialized countries, manufacturing also remains in civil construction, being differentiated only by industrialized products brought ready to the construction site, but with the huge contingent of workers. According to Ferro, Filippo Brunelleschi, 14th century Florentine architect and sculptor, who first introduced manufacturing to the architectura construction site when building the Dome of Santa Maria del Fiore church in Florence. Brunelleschi made the design away from the construction site by using a methodology he invented, which was based on the technique of exact perspective, a mathematical concept unknown to the workers of that time. Brunelleschi replaced the Gothic style by the classical forms he had seen in Rome, which were also unknown to the workers of the period. With this perspective, the architect ceased to belong to mechanical arts and became part of the liberal arts. And now design was a result of mental and not manual work. Ferro says, the master stonemason or the master carpenter began to move away from the construction site to draw certain details in advance. Little by little, this distance became a constant, and the drawings began to acquire a certain independence in relation to the construction site. Ferro believes that these were the first changes in the productive process of architecture that degraded and debased work, which had previously been carried out by the collective jointly. He described this period as of the formal subordination, as although the builder still has the know-how, he had to obey the architect's instructions. Ferro states that the employers could not put up with a monopoly of knowledge and know-how that the workers had kept, as this eroded and undermined their domination. Thus, beginning with the design, the project gradually moved away from the construction site, becoming an independent entity and contradicting the productive logic in the Gothic period. Ferro says that, but there was still a serious defect. This design, even though separate, even showing relative autonomy and disobedience to certain construction precepts, kept us in a world of a form which was still linked to the admirable practice of the cathedrals builders. This was a defeat that once again would soon be corrected to a great extent by Brunelleschi. His correction took a simple and obvious shortcut, a change of form. The Gothic form quickly lost ground. In addition to the prestige of ancient Rome, the classical form has in its favor the confusing treatise of Vitruvius, a Roman architect of the 15 before Christ, of which the Gothic has no equivalent. For Sergio Ferro, the architect, since the days of Brunelleschi, had devalued the workers' know-how by superimposing his own knowledge on theirs, establishing the hierarchy of command on the architectural construction sites. The introduction of a new material also added to the alienation of work of the builders, devaluing the knowledge they had mastered. Ferro points to the introduction of a concrete in his article, named Concrete as Weapon, published in Harvard Design Magazine 218. This form of work relationship is called alienated work, work subdivided into parts and times, dependent on the hierarchy of command, following a decreasing flow whose beginning is found in the architect, passing through the supervisor, and concluding in the construction site teams. If, on one hand, alienated work downgrades the competence of these teams, who know only part of the process, on the other hand, it upgrades those who know the whole of architecture production, the architect and the supervisor. On the construction site, the plans and memorials of the architects, engineer, and multidisciplinary teams, whatever, decoded by the supervisors and communicated as a work order, commands the subdivided work. At this time, they represent nothing more than a particular form of despotism by the capitalist leadership. The fundamental function of architecture design is to enable the commodity form of the architecture object, which without the design would not be achieved. What matters is that this design provides the ground, the backbone to which everything will conform on the construction site or in the units that produce the parts. In particular, and in this the main point, it will combine the work which was previously separated and the work with instruments. For us, there is no possible doubt. It is because the construction site is heteronomous under the capital that brings the design into existence, arriving ready and from outside. Architecture design is a mandatory path for the extraction of surplus value and cannot be separated from other productions design. If the intention is to restore workers' knowledge and know-how, says Ferro, it is necessary to end alienated labor. Here, it is necessary that the architect undo the hierarchical organizational structure in which she finds herself, and outline other types of relationships to put in its place. This does not mean ending manufacture at the construction site, but rather ending the production of the design made in isolation by the architect. In other words, the design is again made at the construction site collectively by the team as a whole. This is the free work proposal. he says, however, the work of revision will not mean ignoring manufacturing. The only realistic position is to assume manufacturing in favor of autonomy. Teams are the basic units of manufacturing. They concentrate a certain type of know-how, specific tools and materials, and they are organized hierarchically. The current trend is to reduce the extent of know-how, to separate the management and distribution of tools and materials into a special logistical service, to make heteronomous levels of hierarchy. It is necessary to turn this inside out, neither reducing nor increasing the field of know-how a priori. What should determine the extent of this field is the homogeneity, the organic nature of a type of know-how. In turn, the hierarchy must change its meaning and become merely a relationship of the formation, transmission of knowledge and know-how, which, despite their complementarity, are today clearly separated. Bricklayers, for example, can propose the top-performing structures for the available materials and techniques, those which are the best, and so on for all the teams. The project ensuring, above all, the compatibility of specific optimizations, instead of premature unity here, in what our students call the aesthetics of separation, the particularity of each path will no longer be expressed. The unity will come from the free cooperation of the desired community. The demand for, well, this is the final words. The demand for surplus value has grown with the development of financial capital, which is leading to a concentration of economic power and a consequent devaluation and precariousness of work worldwide. Paris, for example, today is working out a plan that will double the size of the city through roads, metro, airports, residence, smart office buildings, etc. The rest of the economy has nothing modern, like, for example, Silicon Valley. On the contrary, it is made up of luxury activities to increase the demand for restaurants and hotels. Cities have become tourist cities. Paris today is considered the most important tourist city in the world, with the increase in precarious work of the butlers and waiters type. Around 41% of the GDP of these cities is focused on civil construction, producing a gigantic mass of surplus value in order to compensate for the loss in the profit rates of other sectors. Reactions to this situation are taking place, for example, from those who are below the poverty line, such as the Gilets Jaunes Yellow Vest movement in France, many of whom are retired and before teachers, bank employees, etc., living on remains found in garbage cans, without any assistance from the violently repressed by the government, as happens in the United States and other European and American capitals. Filgueiras and Cavalcanti compare the current period with the working conditions at the time of Ruskin in Victorian England, with excessively long working hours and the lack of legislation to guarantee protection for those who work. As a result, misery and social inequality. The current policies of the debasement of work and the job insecurity affects all workers, regardless of the sector in which they work. The technology of industry 4.0 associated with the jobs made available on digital platforms has taken the world of work to a barbaric position. He says, Industry 4.0, a term coined by the German government on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, an expression used by participants at the World Economic Forum in Davos, constitute a set of innovative technologies such as nanotechnology, digital platform, artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, among others, which represent a quality leap in the ability to organize and control work. Platforms are combined infrastructures of software and hardware organized through digital algorithms. The algorithms can be a cake recipe or a process of rationalization and activity. In the case of digital algorithms, we are talking about a sequence of instructions that tells the computer what to do within a set of precisely defined steps and rules designed to perform a task. What determines, in fact, the new production capacity of the platform companies is the platform itself, which expands the capacity for organization and control over work. Technology at the service of capital has transformed designers, architects, teachers, dentists, doctors, nurses, etc., from salaried employees with social protection to informal and precarious workers. When industry became more flexible, expelling from within its walls a series of activities it previously carried out, it also discarded the salaried employees, who was soon hired as a temporary self-employed worker. This change made work precarious, finished with workers' rights, and thus triggered a complementary process of changes in labor laws, with the aim of facilitating the hiring of informal workers. Refeudalization of labor relations. This became part of the fiction of the free worker, although the nature of the relationship is the same. On one hand, those who only have their work to dispose of, and on the other hand, the organizers of the means of production. Atomization of the labor market, ties to solidarity are broken, and workers are left on their own to compete with each other in a true auction of the workforce. Digital platforms have transformed formal work into informal, odd jobs, temporary work, implying eternal insecurity in the face of the threat of being disconnected, fired, for example, from an application or digital platform. The current scenario of digital work is part of the current of the gig economy, the odd job economy, which has intensified since the economic crisis of 2008. However, in Latin America, especially in Brazil, the odd job called bico, getting by informal work, has historically been the norm, not the exception. That is to say that, in a way, that the platforming of work has deepened the privilege of servitude on the continent of labor. And in addition, the worker becomes responsible for their safety expenses, money spent on buying and or maintaining of work tools and food. That is, all responsibility for the work falls on them. The example of the Uber platform is paradigmatic. Drivers are not considered salaried, but are self-employed, directly connected to consumers, independently of hiring the service of the application, and not the other way around. These workers are transformed into customers of their employers. There will always be work, says Cavalcanti, but the notion of employment will no longer be appropriate to describe these activities. Not only industrial work, but all wage work will be in decline due to the emergence of new forms of organization. The precarious work force is inherently unstable. Its members are always on call for an uncertain job. They have no control over their time and depend exclusively on their wage to survive. The similarities between 21st century and the 19th century worlds of work can be seen in long working hours and in the absence of worker rights. Indeed, the proposal for utopias that resist the deterioration and degradation of work and life are therefore able to value and esteem the world of work. In this context, work performed with pleasure and free work can be seen as ideals of necessary policies to stop the barbarism underway in contemporary work. I'd like to finish going back to Ruskin. Back to Ruskin. I was in Chicago this week and took a tour boat through the river, skyscrapers all along the river, and one of them was called Trump Tower. I wondered how would Ruskin analyze that and define what is beauty in these skyscrapers. Ruskin has a way of thinking that is multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary. He would connect architecture with moral, with ethics, memories, etc., and probably would rethink what we consider beautiful in architecture today. He usually connects architecture to memories, to energy, to imagination, to time, to workers, to creativity, to structure, to moral, to ethics, with his multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary way of thinking. And that brings up the importance of Ruskin today, not only for the world of work, as shown before, but by connecting people to people, showing that we are part and dependent of our environment as a whole. Our body functions relating to the environment. Today, the world considers segregation a value. Ruskin shows us that connection is a value that characterizes life, and that the segregation, competition, is death. Today, when the productive forces of capital is turning itself into destructive forces, Ruskin's multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary way of thinking probably can be used to break isolation and segregation. The Search of Lost Time, book of Marcel Proust, when he puts a madeleine, as a little biscuit, inside a cup of tea, makes him remember when he did that long time ago in his grandparents' house. So the past comes to live in the present. And like Ruskin's concept of first impression, our unconscious, forgotten inside ourselves, come to our conscious, provoked by something outside of ourselves. A building, a sound, a smell, something we felt in the past makes us feel it again when something outside. Just a moment, please. Just a moment, I lost myself. here. Something outside of us provokes it. Everything is connected, even our memories. So today, when the productive forces of capital is transforming itself in destructive force, provoking our senses not to feel, Ruskin, on the contrary, shows that segregation and competition means death, and the connections means life. Thank you.
I think we're going to have a chance for some comments or questions, and I think we have microphones. Is that correct? Yes, so some just raise your hand, and a microphone will come to you.
So, a few things. Beverly, my wife Beverly, was was delighted with the work of the George Jensen Company, and she had the opportunity to go to Denmark and to see the Jensen factory, and she was mightily distraught and disappointed to see that one man was doing the bowl of a spoon, another man was doing the top of a spoon. So there's the head of a pin and the tip of a pin. Yeah. As for the separation of the supervisor and architect from the workers, it occurs to me to recall that when the De Young Museum got its new conservation lab, the chief conservator was a friend of mine, called, we were chatting about something, and he said, you know, they forgot to put plugs into the baseboard. We have wires running across the floor. So that is an example of the supervisor being completely detached from the needs of the worker. And finally, a recollection, an appraisal that I did some years ago of long seals that had been taken to Hearst Castle, but not used, and stored off to one side. In the course of the appraisal and understanding these long seals, we saw that they were carved with language all around the perimeter. On closer examination, the language was gibberish. The workers knew that long seals in fancy buildings, cathedrals, and so on, had all sorts of prayers or statements or homage, and they carved what they thought looked like words. So kind of a wonderful collective force drove them to create this perimeter imagery that had nothing to do with actual language, but had to do with the perception of the language they had seen. I think it's kind of wonderful.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the quote. Oh, I'm thinking of the quote that you gave of Ruskin several times about workers should think and thinkers should work, by which Ruskin meant a kind of revolution in education. In other words, his notion was that workers should be intellectuals. I mean, workers should learn and should know the language of architecture, and that the architects should be completely familiar with the worksite and with various crafts and with the world of their workers, so that there should be a kind of educational exchange where the workers know enough to really contribute to the execution of the design, but the architects are also wedded in the disciplines of the craft, and not simply in a kind of intellectual exercise. I wanted to ask you, Claudio, if something about Sergio Ferro's buildings. I know that he he's done some projects. Can you tell us a little bit about the character of some of those projects that he's actually done on the basis of free work?
Yes, unfortunately, I didn't bring any pictures of his work, but I don't know how you call this in English. We call it abóbada. You know, abóbada. It's a form. It's like this. It goes like that. It's really from the Renaissance period. You have the arch, and the arch, when you twist it, makes the dome, and when you transfer.
It's a vault.
Yeah, vault. That's it. That's it. His first buildings were like that, and in brick. And who did the buildings were the construction. It was made. The project was made in the construction site, and after you made this vault, you had a protection from the weather to work inside, and they worked all together to extend, kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, all those stuffs. They did it together. This, I think, was the beginning of his work. Today, Sergio Ferro is in Brazil. He's in São Paulo, and there is a week of Sergio Ferro going on. And I know that they made a sculpture in the University of São Paulo for the prisoners of the dictatorial military in 1964 that extended for 20 years in Brazil. Sergio Ferro participated on this movement of resistance, and he went to jail, he was tortured, and he stayed a year in prison. After he came out, he went to live in France and never came back to Brazil. He only comes back now when he is called to do a lecture or something like that. But what he really did in architecture, he only did that. I don't think he did anything else. He started to work on thoughts after that. And in France, he said he didn't have much space to work. He was a teacher at Grenoble, and they made a laboratory to experiment these theories that he was studying. But he said he didn't have much help from the government or either from the school. So he retired and he continued to write. I think his most of his work today is writing his thoughts. And he read Ruskin in French, and he's familiar to Ruskin, and I think they match in certain aspects of what they think. That's why I try to make I try to join both of them together. Yes.
Wait, we had one up here. I'll give you the microphone next. Here you go.
Yes, hi. I have a question regarding how much of the trades are involved in architecture in Latin America, let's say, versus the US or other, maybe European countries. I'm Latino. I was born in Latin America, and I visited Latin America, and I think there may be more involvement of the trades in how to fix things, how to work things for a project. I myself, When I do a project, I've learned a lot from the workers. I have learned, especially for the framers, when I go on one of my projects, sometimes I actually work on site with them to fix a problem or a question, and I find that very helpful. I don't demean them. I think they're as intelligent as anyone I've ever met, because they've also helped me. And I think it's important for us architects not to be snobs.
Yeah, I think you're very different from normal architecture.
Yeah, you know what? My priority is the project. It's not my ego. I'm not a Frank Gehry.
Yeah. You know that Sergio Ferro, his father had a company that made buildings, and they made some buildings in Brasilia when it started. I think it was, I don't know when was that, but his work, his critical on the architecture side began there, because he saw how the workers, they suffered, and lots of them, the forms were very difficult to make. Lots of them died during the process of the construction, and he says that he hates architecture. And they call him, they used to call him, he was an architect that committed suicide, but that's not the architecture that he wants. That's the architecture that was there, and still is in most of the part in Brazil. He's not. There's some things being done in the fields. The MST, this movement of the workers without land, homeless, they are participating in. Ferro is with them, and they're working together. And there's lots of experience of I don't know how you call it here, but self-constructions, maybe we call it autogestão, where the whole construction is decided with everybody that's going to live in that place. That happened a lot in São Paulo, and happens in the field today. But it's not the normal kind of architecture that is done there, unfortunately. But you are very different.
Thank you. The question is more about Ferro. I mean, he's a thinker, in my opinion, more than really a practicing architect. And his position about Marxism and the relationship between the work and the workers, it's very clear. He, if I'm not wrong, you may correct me, but he was very close, and maybe he worked with Artigas, another important architect of the time. Is that correct? And someone else who is also extremely connected to the relationship between the worker and the oeuvre d'art, the architecture. So how do you see these two personalities? I guess Artigas maybe was a bit older than him, but I mean, I see a lot of connection between the two.
Yeah, you're right. Artigas was his professor at the university.
Okay.
So I think maybe he started to see architecture differently by him. And Artigas has a technique of using the concrete.
Yes.
And he leaves the marks of the workers' hands on the wall. And I think Sergio Ferro respects him a lot. You're right. I think there is a big connection between both of them.
Thank you.
I don't remember the last lecture I went to where there was nothing on the board or something pointing at. So this was very refreshing. Thank you for that. I think there was a lot of mention about pleasure intrinsic to work, and not particularly a question, but would love to hear your thoughts on it, because I couldn't stop thinking about the time factor in it, because having pleasure intrinsic to work means it needs time, like pleasure needs time. But like today when I'm working, it's like every hour of my work has to be monetized, or like every minute I put into it, just, you know, everything is related to money. And a lot of like community-driven projects that I've seen are kind of, they take time. So how do you sort of just, you know, get that balance between pleasure, money, and time?
Well, that's difficult. I think I was talking about utopias, you know, not reality, and.
If we're trying to get as close as possible.
Yeah, but in reality, that doesn't work. You're right. It's money, it's time, it's competition, it's struggling, and that's not the world that I think Ruskin was thinking, and the world Sergio Ferro was thinking. But in a sort, I read once that there was I can't remember his name, but it was in England. He had a factory, and he transformed it into a cooperative. Is that right? Reading Ruskin and William Morris. Do you remember the name?
I'm blanking on his name. Yeah, this was a businessman. There were a number of them. This was a businessman in the Bewley area, in Midlands area, who was sort of converted by Ruskin, and he really worked to translate some of these principles in the way in which management and labor worked, and it was actually quite successful and worked very well. Another project like that was when Ruskin moved to the Lake District and noticed that one of the things happening there was the emergence of textile factories had put widows out of work. So the widows were normally making cloth, making textiles, and in one fell swoop, within weeks, they were all out of work. And in those days, without pensions and Social Security, they were literally, in effect, on the streets, these widows. So Ruskin got with another businessman associate with him, and he said, form a cooperative of these widows. So the widows got together, they found a niche of lace, making lace, that was a niche market, got them all employed, and apparently this went on, I think, for well into the 20th century, these linen industries. But again, it was a kind of creative response to a situation and trying to find a way, at least in an individual situation, to translate some of this into practice.
Hi. Hi. I just want to say I grew up in Brasilia, and I would share that view with Ferro, that the architecture there, even though it's very admired from afar, and although Niemeyer called himself a communist and everything, it's a completely disconnected to the environment, to the people. The buildings there they're supposed to be sculptures, but they are disconnected. The materials used have nothing to do with the area, marble, white marble, and we have all that red dirt, so everything just starts looking shabby pretty quickly. So I just want to share that I would appreciate that thought. As a Brasiliense, I think they have a lot to answer for.
Well, but he never mentioned communism.
Oh, no,
methodologically, but also intellectually speaking. I mean, we don't have to, I mean, this is not the issue of how Niemeyer behaved in his life. He did what he did and so on, and that's part of it. So the origin of the Ruskin position is the Marx capital, the commodification. That's the point. And how do you relate to that condition? And if I understand well, it's this kind of thinking that it's interesting Sergio Ferro at a certain moment in his life and affected very much his own life. I mean, he went to jail, the dictatorship was very strong against him, which is one, not the only case in Brazil, but it's a very important case, I mean, at least for architectural historians.
Yeah, we were talking this morning about a film that is on the movies today. It's called We're Still Here. It talks about this moment.
Yes, that's exactly the same time.
Uh-huh.
I don't want to say that you were not there, but the issue is, whatever Oscar Niemeyer did in his life, it has nothing to do with the idea of reconceptualizing a strongly and strictly Marxist philosophy.
no, I didn't mention any of that. Just that
He's not a
the
communist.
that built Brasilia really suffered a lot, and they built and they were pushed out. So a lot of the philosophy that was embedded in the building, the design of Brasilia, of course, in real life do not play out, but that's often the case.
Yeah. Yeah, the workers went to live in separated places outside Brasilia. Yeah, it's terrible. But Sergio Ferro said once that what he liked in Ruskin about the work done with pleasure is that most communists or even Marxists that he knew never treated the experience of working as the main subject. They talked about expropriating the capitalists and assuming the state, assuming the factories and the planning and everything, but they didn't go in discussing how the work is done. And Lenin said when the revolution, the Russian Revolution took place in 1917, that we should implement the modern technique of production, Taylorism. That does nothing have to do with nothing. That's to do with Marxist. And that's what happened. Oh, but let me just what Sergio Ferro said, that Ruskin goes right to the point. It's in the production process that the surplus is gross, and that is where the separation of thinking and doing takes place, and the power of that politically inside the process takes place. And that's what Ruskin is against, and that's what Sergio Ferro is against.
So I want to take a little bit of a detour back to the beginning of the lecture. You mentioned, you used the word holistic, and I don't know if Ruskin used that word or...
No.
No.
I think I'm somebody said it, but it wasn't Ruskin.
Well, I'm thinking that is very much a Ruskinian principle in terms of the individual and the individual's relationship to the artwork or to, because he obviously did tons of research before, for example, he would do a drawing in nature. He seemed to know everything about that object, and you know, and he collected gems and stones, and he drew them from all different angles. And my father was a very renowned figure drawing teacher. He also taught Disney animators anatomy, and he loved using the word holistic because he felt like that it was more than, as you were saying, the thought. It involved the body. It involved also the sort of interdisciplinary, multiple disciplinary, you know, all the things that were related to that moment. And so, for example, when he had his students draw a knight in armor, he would have the student put on a piece of armor while they were drawing. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that in relation to architecture. I mean, I know there's a distance, and because architecture's so much more, I mean, like I love theoretical physics, but to be a physicist, you have to know mathematics, and I imagine a lot of that's the same with architecture. But do you have any more thoughts about holistic work in the arts?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer you. But I think.
Well, you mentioned the law of help, though.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's a lot. I think holistic. When somebody that said that, I don't know if it's Hunt, if it's there's other Helsinger. Hersey, I don't know who said that, but somebody said it.
But it's also in relation to not being separated from your environment and from the interaction of people with the objects. And I don't know. That's my thought.
Yeah, I found it. It's Hersey that says that. He says that to understand Ruskin, because he is never concentrated on a single subject, all are joined in him, and when he lets himself be carried away in a movement of his holistic discourse, so to speak, his reader initially feels lost. I don't know what you guys think about when you read Ruskin, but I was lost lots of times. What's he talking about?
Right. But what it is in Ruskin is that search for coherence, but not a false coherence, drawing in all the elements, looking at all the elements and trying to find the thread, you know, that connects them, because that's the key for Ruskin. Even if, I love this, he starts a lecture about crystallography and he ends by spending 2/3 of it talking about Cistercian architecture. I mean, just, you know, so.
Well, it's associated.
Yeah, everything's connected, and we are connected to everything. And I think that's why Ruskin is important today, because today everything's separated, and that's a value, segregation, and all that. And he just puts everything together and says that everybody's dependent, nobody's unique, and you don't have an autonomy. This autonomy is given by the whole, when the whole works together. And that's very interesting for today, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ruskin Art Club, I would just urge you to, those of you who are not familiar, www.ruskinartclub.org, and there you'll find not only our calendar of events, but lots of Ruskin resources, including the PDFs of all 39 volumes of the complete works of Ruskin. So it's all there. One of the things I would, again, for those of you who are interested, one of the things we do, you'll find it on our calendar, is we have study sessions. We have them about 15 times a year, and this year we're studying the Stones of Venice, and we're studying it with Venetians. So there is a Ruskin Center at the Ca' Foscari University in Venice, and they're joining us, so we're talking about Venice with Venetians. So you're most welcome to join us for those Zoom sessions and for the rest of our calendar events. And I think we have refreshments.
And this will be on YouTube?
Yes, we will have this posted on our YouTube channel. This will make 100 lectures on our this lecture will be 100 lectures on our archive of presentations. So enjoy. Thank you.